What is something they taught you in elementary school that is not true anymore? Satchel Gibson said. The borders and names of many European countries. I was born in 1978. Hypoosmotic said. People wonder why so many adults don't have a good understanding on which foods are healthy when the propaganda we were taught as children is right there. Feelin' like a cloud 420 said. Somewhat off topic, but when I visited the US I was shocked to discover that South Park was rated 17+, R-rated. I went to a summer camp in California when I was I think 13 or 14, and one evening a small group I was with was just relaxing watching videos and we decided to watch some Netflix, so we were trying to choose something to watch. I saw that South Park was an option as we were scrolling through, so I suggested it and one of the chaperones told me we couldn't watch that. He seemed a bit shocked that I even suggested it, so I asked him why and he told me that it was rated R. I'm French and Luxembourgish and on French TV, and I think it's probably similar in other neighboring countries. When South Park was being broadcasted we only had a warning stating that it wasn't recommended, was forbidden to people under 12 years of age. When I told that to the chaperone he was a bit dumbfounded. Jukey Juke said. Running zigzag from an alligator will cause a gator to roll over. Of course. This was taught in Florida. Let me elaborate since I've had some people call BS on this and I'm just answering the topic honestly. It was 1998. 4th grade in Orlando. The teacher was 65+ years old. I can't remember if she was born and raised in Florida. She had an Irish last name. I am an Army brat. We lived in another country prior to moving to Florida when I was in 3rd grade. So I took it at face value at the time, cause how was I supposed to know they were lying to us? During a conversation with my younger cousins, this fact came up and not a single one of them ever heard it. They're 10 years younger than us, so I looked it up and found out we were duped. Their Eisner Way said. Valid reasons sometimes get dumbed down for the appropriate audience. The real answer should have been, you're going to enter things in wrong, fat finger something, not have your memory cleared etc. etc. So it's useful to have a base level of math memorization or a mental framework and understanding of which you're calculating to anticipate the types of answers you should be getting so that you might be able to catch an error in the process. Noise1C said. There's some popular video out there of a guy making a sandwich after doing a math problem while waiting for new math to do the same one. The issue, however, is that he isn't teaching math, he's solving the problem as he's already been taught. The teacher is breaking down how the system works, then solving the problem, step by step. When I looked at it, it essentially boils down to the same kind of overall structure, but it's mostly how I break it down in my head if I most easily wanted to work it out without a scratch sheet of paper handy. So while it takes some setup to get to, in the end I think it saves time and makes it easier to mental math it. Eruluvator said. I was a TA in college. I wrote exclusively in cursive on the board until one of my students asked me to write in print because they never learned cursive. I did my best to write in print the next class. I had 5 students, including the one who asked me to write in print, come up to me after class and ask for clarification as to what I wrote and to ask me not to write in print again. After that, I put it in the syllabus for the class that my printed handwriting is utterly illegible for most, so I would be writing in cursive and to feel free to ask me any questions, but that I'd also provide typed copies of my notes online before class so students could always follow along there. It really wound up helping my students a lot. Vicarious Glutton said. Just bodily autonomy in general. Seeing my nibblings being taught from being old enough to walk that they get to choose if they give kisses and or cuddles and there's no pleading from the grown-up, kid word rules, is great. No explanation needed. You don't want to give me hugs and kisses, you don't. It makes me happy that they know they can say no and it should be respected always. I wish I'd grown up understanding that. TDY Dave 2 said. One of my earliest school memories, early 60s, was upon seeing a map of the world. I commented about the matching contours between South America and Africa. The teacher told me it was just a coincidence. I also recall an old science textbook that talked about the origin of the universe. While it mentioned the Big Bang, the favored theory was that of a steady-state universe. The Big Bang was regarded as an attempt by religious groups to insert creationism into science. Soy Sauce Syringe said. Bears are just sleepy during the winter to conserve energy. They're not true hibernators. You can wake them up pretty easily. Their heart rate and body temperature drops slightly while they sleep, but that's it. Woodchucks, For example, our true hibernators. Their body temperature goes from around 98 degrees Fahrenheit to under 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Their heartbeat goes from around 80 BPM to 5 BPM or lower, and their continually growing teeth pause their growth. They might get up every few weeks to snack and poop, but other than that you can't wake them up at all. Construction crews will sometimes find them, move them aside, and then put them back and bury them once they're done working, all without the woodchuck ever waking up. Red XV said, "If I ever forgot a pencil or a pen, whenever I asked my teacher to go get one from my locker, they would say, 'You think in college they're just going to let you leave class to go get one? They aren't, and you're just going to have to sit there without one.' Well, come to find out, when I got into college, I could just get up and leave the class whenever I wanted. I didn't even need to ask to go to the bathroom. Fucking liars." Coffee Lover 777 said, "It also took special education programs out of the mix. There was no longer money for these programs as all kids were just in the same classes, despite their differing educational needs. Children with severe cognitive issues were lumped in with children who didn't have the same issues. So all the children got less of an education because teachers who had an even harder time teaching when they were tending to higher needs children, they didn't have the resources to support." Kajimus Prime said, "This wasn't so much that you'd be perfectly safe and fine. In the event of a nuclear blast, depending on your distance from it, ducking and covering behind, or in something like a ditch or barricade would offer much better protection from the initial blast wave. You'd still be fucked when it came to the fallout though. But it would buy you precious time to escape and seek treatment." Edit. At least that is how it was explained to me, but I was in school in the 90s, long after the Cold War, and duck and cover was taught. Pillow-sucking weirdo said, "I remember reading a story narrated to a historian about the day a slave was set free. He said Union troops came through, rounded up the slaves, told them they were free, and then left. Georgia, Sherman's army. The former slaves kind of muddled around in shock, and then about an hour later the plantation master came out and offered to pay them a tiny sum to stay. So they mostly stayed. And then eventually the plantation master began docking their room and board, clothes, food, etc. against their pay, and they were basically back to slavery again. Fun fact we were not taught in school and I still don't have a great understanding about. Shortly after the war, there were a number of black business people and politicians in the South. The Klan et al. Rallied and kicked them out, or killed them, over the next few decades." 15 Redstone said, "Not quite true. The size of the Earth is pretty easy to figure out if you assume it's spherical because latitudes can be measured just by looking at the sky, so north-south distances are easy. The difficult part was figuring out longitude without accurate portable timekeeping devices. That caused east-west distances to be way off. Especially since distances provided by people who travel to Asia tended to be exaggerated. Looking at you, Marco Polo. The mapmaker who advised Columbus didn't think that the Earth was much smaller than it is. He thought Asia was way wider and thus closer." Archfuba said, "A lot of you aren't ready for it, dude. I remember thinking milk is super healthy as a kid because signs were everywhere. Milk is actually great for really young kids, but as you get older, milk really isn't the best unless you're bodybuilding and trying to hit macros or something similar. Lot of sugar. There's more calcium in almost every other health food. Turns out the US just really like to sell milk to kids as a political thing to help farmers. It's a kind of everyone wins thing. Someone correct me if I am wrong, but this is what I've learned growing up. I drink milk occasionally now, but it seemed like the thing to do when I was younger." Allie Wright said, "The Native Americans, Indians according to my teacher, welcomed the Pilgrims and felt sorry for them because they were struggling. The Pilgrims invited them to the first Thanksgiving to thank them for their help. I found this a little sus to begin with, but I let it go because I was like 7 and more interested in making cute little hand turkeys and such. The further I went in school, the more I realized how messed up that description is." Thworldby Storm said, "Yeah, he was really interesting. I read a great article years back that stuck with me, wish I could find it now, basically outlining that Squanto, having been abducted and sent to live in England, knew the capabilities of the colonists very well. When he returned to his home he found that his cousin, I think, had taken over the authority position that should have been Squanto's. He formed an alliance with the colonists in part so they would back his big to be in charge and increase his political clout because he'd be the only one who could talk with them. 123,443,212,314 said. My science teacher once said something like learning science is a process of lying to yourself a little less each time, and that's always stuck with me, because actually that's how most education has worked for me, from science to English to history, even to stuff that they don't teach. It's not that this is wrong. It's that this model is simplified in order to understand the basic ideas contained in it. The quantum model is just delving deeper into reality. So, don't feel shitty that you don't know this. This is just a deeper layer. Also, with a lot of stuff, why do you need to know this, really? I love Jimmigan said. It was totally normal to refer to Native Americans as Indians. I remember in kindergarten the teacher was teaching us about them, kinda, not really, and everyone had to pick an Indian name and we had to chant this very racist and stereotypical chant about them. In second grade for a Thanksgiving party you were required to dress up as either a pilgrim or an Indian and all the white kids chose to be pilgrims because of internalized racism taught by their parents. I was literally the only kid in my class who dressed up as Native American and all the white girls told me I looked dirty. Scottsdale, Arizona folks. The programmer said. I don't think the intent was to say you won't have a calculator to do your job. It was more about when you were at a store and trying to determine which option has a better per unit cost, or translating between Celsius and Fahrenheit. That is everyday life kind of math. And while it's not true anymore, it's still important to be able to do at least basic arithmetic to be able to do algebra, and any more advanced subjects in math or science. Also, it helps to know if what your calculator spits out is at all reasonable or you added an extra zero or something, because calculators can't read minds yet. Lonabird said. You need to stretch before doing pay or you could hurt yourself. So it turns out stretching before physical exercise increases the chance you'll hurt yourself and you should do it after exercise to help your muscles recover. The entire founding history of Australia. The entire concept of Aboriginals as they were called in the distant past of 2004. Blood is blue in the veins. You should brush your teeth top to bottom while they're closed together. In the distant past the different continents may have been connected. Pretty sure we knew about Pangaea by the 2000s. Miss Tang said. The 3 R's. Reuse, reduce, recycle. Was taught this in elementary school, as well lead the recycling program after school and at lunch, cleaning out other students' containers and sorting metals, glass, and plastics. While removing the contabs for the purpose of being used to make wheelchairs for those in need. Turns out many years later all that work was for nothing. It was discovered the private garbage contractors who services the schools lied about sorting their garbage and recycling and dumped everything into the same pile and straight to the landfill, and we not need to go far for why reuse and reduce was not true anymore with takeout culture and fast fashion, just to name a few. Swimma LBC said. A lot of people still think that it's too dark to teach kids and don't want it taught until at least high school. I say fuck that. The kids who experienced it were the same ages as the kids that people want to protect from the truth. I remember my teachers back in the 90s comparing it to a normal boarding school. Said it was easier to get to class when they lived on the campus and easier to learn a new language when you're submerged in it. The last school didn't close until 1996. That was when I was in grade 5. 123,443,212,314 said. As in a roadmap? Because I think you still should have won. Sure, you have magical technology on you at all times. But it can die or be disconnected or faulty at any point in time. A roadmap gets you there even if you're in the middle of nowhere with no signal. Also, as in map of the world? Because it's still one of my fondest memories that my dad taught me to recognize all the countries on a map. It's probably worth the investment just for that. Clavis said. Dare to just say no to drugs. I never did any because they scared the shit out of me and made me look at people who used drugs as broken and bad. I still don't do any but see all of the harm the war on drugs has caused and realized that most people use them to escape, take the edge off of their pain or feel better. I also realized that addiction is something that can happen to anyone, not just bad people who do illegal drugs. Reba Jack said. In 8th grade, my history teacher showed us pictures of all the past presidents and told us that unfortunately, an unspoken requirement to becoming the president is, you have to be a white guy. This teacher was conservative, politically speaking, so it wasn't like he was trying to be woke. It wasn't him trying to be racist either. He was just trying to have a conversation about race and politics. Never forgot that moment. Then a few years later I remember crying a bit from happiness when Obama got elected. What a disappointment he turned out to be. Books, Love, Talks and Ideas said, "You can be whatever you want to be if you do well at school, graduate, and go to college or university. Although this is a good thing, caring about education is always a good thing. It is a total lie that you just need to do well at school and graduate college to get what you want career-wise. You will need a lot more than just that to succeed nowadays." Perhaps that mindset worked well and it was correct in the 1990s, but today that's definitely not how things are working. A Wildman app here said, "Half the things about the civics of the U.S. federal government, particularly checks and balances. About 85% of legislation is enacted by unelected administrators. That each bill that goes through Congress is deliberated on, hardly ever. The Supreme Court seems to be fairly comfortable making law from the bench for the sake of political expediency. The color and scope of executive orders have expanded to the point of basically being law. That Congress is the body which needs to declare war. Bush basically blew that out of the water." Ibn Karafatim said, "Yeah, although in a very different way than I was told as a kid. Turns out you can't criminalize away a public health problem. And for example, alcohol is fine in moderation and never take amphetamine ended up being egregiously bad advice for me, because I have ADHD. I got addicted to alcohol because I couldn't really do anything in moderation before I was prescribed amphetamine. Now I'm sober. I drastically underestimated the seriousness of socially acceptable drugs. And on the other hand, certain drugs have been massively beneficial to my mental health, but many of them are still restricted as if they're more dangerous than things that actually kill thousands upon thousands of people every year." Look out for the Train Zero said, "There were 9 planets when I first learned them. Not long after, this was changed, but we all heard the news. Taste areas on the tongue, umami was just added in like halfway through, but apparently that's not how it works either. In 8th grade, yeah that's not elementary school but still interesting, we learned that a kilogram was defined by a cylinder or IDK with made from different metals that by definition always had a mass of 1 kilogram but that scientists didn't like this because tiny parts can rub off into getting slightly lighter." Doom Goober said, "The Star-Spangled Banner describes an important engagement in American history. In truth, while the Battle of Baltimore was important, the events described in Star-Spangled Banner, defense of Fort McHenry, were somewhat meaningless. The Brits had already been defeated on land, their Navy-based attack and landing had been defeated thoroughly by low tide, deliberately sunken ships in Baltimore Harbor blocking the way, and Fort McHenry's guns. British military doctrine also recommended against fighting forts with ships. Ships sink, forts don't. The engagement described in Star-Spangled Banner was a British fuck you experiment to see if long-range bombardment mortars and Congreve rockets could destroy a fort from a distance. As the events proved, they could not. The technology was too inaccurate, the earthen wall fort too strong. The Brits fired for 25 hours and only 4 men in the fort were killed. So, Star-Spangled Banner is symbolic song of America coming together to defeat the Brits in War of 1812, but unlike what we were taught in school, the actual engagement described was mostly meaningless and the fort was not really under threat of falling. Edit. I should mention the origin of the song explains why its lyrics seem exaggerated. It was written by Francis Scott Key while the attack was happening. He was also trapped in a truce ship near the Brits. So, he could see the massive amount of outgoing fire. But he could not see if the shots were hitting the fort or not. So, to Scott Key, the attack must have seemed massive, devastating and surprising the fort stood. The reality was a little different. I am here for good said. I was taught that pyramids were built by slaves. Now I know they were workers that were given paid in food and beer. And even built homes near to their workplace. I also been told that someone will want to give me drugs for absolutely free and never show again leaving me on my drug hunger. I was born in 2002 so internet was still a new thing so they teached us to never underestimate Boverin skills and using internet of some pedophile. As long as the last two may be true in some aspects, as long we have to remember that most of children wouldn't trust some unknown men with cookies made of cocaine instead of flavor. Fabopf said. Throughout the late 1960s and 70s, It was accepted that there was a trend of global cooling. Newsweek and the Washington Post published articles that world was approaching another ice age and criticized governments not preparing. Newsweek published a correction in 2006, about 30 years after the fact. Today there are 118 elements. Back in high school there was about 104. In the 60s and 70s, members of the LGBT community were considered mentally ill. Homosexuality was listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders as a mental illness. Depression was not. It was added in the 80s. In engineering we learned about Moore's Law, which effectively doubled the amount of transistors on a piece of silicon doubles every 2 years. We have now plateaued.